Okay, game 3 here. And honestly, looking at this board, there are two ways you could go, I think. Although one of them is probably clearly worse. There are a lot of money options. There's Soothsayer. I mean, there's Lighthouse to defend from Soothsayer, but Soothsayer gives you gold. That's good for money. And there's also Treasure Trove, which is good for money as well. And Scouting Party as well. So that can really help you out if you're going for a money strategy, I believe. But there's also a bit of things to do here with the engine. There's Quarry to make your things cheaper, your action cards cheaper. There's Draw in Library and Advisor, your choice of draw, really. And what really tipped me over to the engine, I was thinking about money at first, but what really tipped me over to the engine was the Stonemason, the king of piles, the mighty Stonemason. So my opponent goes for the Quarry there, and I'm still trying to decide whether or not to go for engine or money. I eventually decide on the engine, like I said, and the reason for that is the Stonemason. You can build your engine very quickly, you can have control over piles, and you have control over gains, both through buying Stonemason and through trashing cards with the Stonemason. So if you're going for the engine, you want a lighthouse. Well, I wanted a lighthouse anyway, because I was going for library as draw. And if the library is paired with the lighthouse in your hand, you can reduce your hand size. That the lighthouse will come down and you have one less card. The library will draw one more card, which is great news for you. So we both go for a pair of ports on turn 3 here. Ports is obviously important, or are obviously important, because there are no other villages on the board. You can call your royal carriage on an advisor to get actions that way, but that is, a lot of energy and investment to do that. Ports do it much more easily. So for here, I could go for something like Scouting Party or Port, which is what I was considering, but I would much rather have the 2 5-cost cards. After getting the discount from the Quarry, Stonemason on Quarry is excellent. Stonemason goes down to 0 and you can gain anything for just a lot cheaper. And here, going to pick up a pair of libraries to start the draw engine going. I already have a pair of ports, no problem adding the pair of libraries there. So here my opponent goes for a similar play, going for the Stonemason overpay, this time into 1 library and to 1 royal carriage, I believe. So a lucky turn for me here, able to pair the port with the library, but it doesn't draw me anything exciting. Now here I do not have the Quarry in place, so I can't make any significant Stonemason overpays. So at this point I'm just going to pick up a pair of ports. I could go for a single 5-cost, but I would much rather go for 2 5-costs at once, as I can do on this hand, even while thinning a copper, so that's great. Get the deck a bit thinner, a bit more consistent. My opponent goes for an advisor here. Now that it does not work well with the library, because if you play your advisor before your library, your hand size is increased potentially, and then it can anti-synergize is what I'm saying. So I was a bit confused by the advisor there. I thought port would have been much better, even a second Quarry actually, but I mean, they can work together as well. They don't have to work against each other, so it is probably okay. I Stonemason overpay here for a pair of 5-cost cards, this time being the Royal Carriage. At this point, I believe I have enough actions in my deck that the Royal Carriage will find good targets, although that's not something you have to worry about with the Royal Carriage. It can just sit on your mat until there's a target that presents itself, but I mean, then you kind of wasting it at that point, I feel, if it just stays there for 2 or 3 turns. So here I have a choice of whether to call this carriage on the port or on the Stonemason. If I call it on the port, it is really just to probably find my other library, maybe. That is probably the best thing that I can find. So instead, I decide to call it on the Stonemason. Now this is something people advise you not to do. This is not the purpose of Stonemason, to trash your coppers away, but it is something that I am going to do in this game. I have the opportunity to do so, because with the quarry I can still pick up something nice here with the stonemason. So I can go directly for a pair of ports here, but I am going to overpay with the stonemason for it, and the reason for that is I want the stonemason in my deck. With the extra ports I can support the stonemason and it will give me a lot of endgame control. The more stonemasons that I have is the more control I have over the end of the game. So one interesting thing about this game is contraband, the only source of plus buy here, and I think it is decent on this board. They can't really cut you off from everything just from one contraband, and with the plus buy and quarry they can't cut you off from actions, they can't cut you from provinces, but with stonemason you can, you know, cut a gold into 2 duchies and get equivalent points that way. So I think contraband is decent on this board. Probably would have picked it up had I enough time, but stonemason doesn't gain it and I would much rather have the action cards. So here, small turn for both my opponent and myself. I pick up the lighthouse here. Again, it works well with the library draw if you draw it together like in this hand. I could have gone for scouting party on the last turn, but I tracked my deck and I knew port and library was together here. I'm going to deny the stonemason for my opponent, prevent any kind of trashing, any kind of gaining that way. Just limit my opponent's options. Again, here they go for a pair of advisors. And here this is going to be a good turn for me here. I'm able to reduce my hand size to 2 before playing this library. Obviously keeping the port and the royal carriage here. No reason not to keep the royal carriage, honestly. Get that down on the mat. And again, same choice as before, but this time calling it on the port to try to find my library. There's a much better chance that I find my library here. And going to trash twice with this stonemason actually, just to deplete my hand size for the library to draw a lot of cards. So there is quite a bit of help for the library on this board. The lighthouse, the stonemason, if you're able to trash your coppers away like I was able to, and I'm able to trash all of them here. Just the solitary quarry as the only treasure in my deck. I'm going to go for a pair of 5 costs at this point. So I pick up a soothsayer here. The reason for the soothsayer is not to curse my opponent. It would be nice, and it also makes their libraries worse, but I want the gold from it, so my stonemason has better targets to trash things, and the third library there just to add a bit of reliability, so turns like this with 2 stonemasons and 2 libraries do not happen. Fortunately, my opponent has a bit of a quiet turn. Here I think for a bit, because already at this point you have to worry about piles with stonemason on the board. It's the king of piles, so you have to be very, very vigilant at all times, especially coming down to the end of the game. The end of the game is a lot closer than you think with stonemason around. I think it's reasonable for me to pick up a couple ports there. I don't think my opponent can end the game on me somehow, even with the stonemasons they have. And the reason for that is because I have a lot more ports than my opponent, and they just probably can't play all those terminals. I think anyway. I was wrong in the last game and my opponent piled out on me. But this time I'm a bit more confident. So here I pick up the scouting party just to prevent, any, double stonemason, triple library hands or anything like that. And my opponent goes for a stonemason overpay here, and my eyes light up seeing that, because I start to look for a pile out. Maybe I already had the pile out even without that stonemason overpay. But now seeing that red beacon over the stonemasons, it alerts me to the fact that you should try for a pile out. And maybe I should have been trying for a pile out a lot earlier. But anyway, this point I'm just trying to see what is the best course of action here. I could trash the soothsayer, but I am going to keep it just to get the gold, and I'm able to redraw the gold, so that was great. And I believe maybe at this point I think I have the game in hand here. It's just a matter of finding it, because with the royal carriages and the stonemasons I can empty the lighthouses and the remaining stonemasons. I do make a bit of a mistake here. I trash all the treasure out from my hand, and I should have kept some back because I need to buy the last stonemason to finish the game, but I'm able to rectify that. So I pick up a pair of lighthouses, one duchy, and another lighthouse. Get rid of the quarry for the remaining lighthouses. And bit worried here, but I'm able to trash out for the win here. So that's game 3. Thank you for watching.